Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? Welcome to today's Council on Foreign Relations meeting. This meeting is on the record, and members are joining both in person and virtually. For those attending virtually, to ask a question during the Q&A period, click on the raise hand icon on your Zoom window. When you are called on to speak, please accept the unmute now prompt, then proceed with your name and affiliation, followed by your question. Your video will remain off, but your microphone will be unmuted. For those attending in person, a reminder to silence all mobile devices. If you are called on during Q&A, please stand, make sure to speak into the microphone, and state your name and affiliation before asking your question. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Council on Foreign Relations meeting, The Question of Palestinian Statehood, a conversation with Representative Khanna. I'm Felicia Schwartz. I'm the diplomatic correspondent at Politico, and I'll be presiding over today's discussion. In addition to the CFR members here in the room in Washington, I'd like to welcome the over 200 members joining virtually by Zoom. I think Congressman Khanna needs no introduction, but I will try. He represents California's 17th District in Silicon Valley. He's a leading progressive voice on technology, economic justice, and foreign policy, and is taking on the mantle of suggesting recognition of a Palestinian state, which we're here to talk about today. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Felicia, for agreeing to moderate. Thank you to President Froman for your years of public service. Could have called him secretary, ambassador, whatever, the trade rep, and all your work and friendship. I just appreciate the chance to talk about something this week other than Epstein, so thank you for providing me with a forum. I'll speak for a few minutes and then really want to have a dialogue. The talk today and the purpose is really to offer a horizon of hope in a Middle East that has been gripped by despair, extremism, that has led to destruction and violence. It's not empty moral preening. It's not punitive against any party. It is a sense that in the 21st century, we need to do better in the Middle East. And frankly, that a new generation needs to lead the way. The reality is that Hamas committed a brutal terrorist attack on October 7th. And the world, including me and the Congress, said that there had to be a response to hold Hamas accountable and the release of those hostages. And then the Prime Minister defined a goal that was unachievable. Instead of the goal being that October 7th should never happen again, by the way, as you know, troops that were supposed to be guarding the Gaza border were actually helping settlers in the West Bank. Instead of having an October 7th never again goal, he had a goal to militarily eliminate Hamas. So much so that he's trying to militarily eliminate them in Qatar. And if you talk to our own military, they would have told you months in that that was not achievable. You cannot militarily eliminate Hamas. The way to eliminate Hamas is to offer an alternative with the 22 Arab states. And so I have called for a framework that actually can provide an alternative to Hamas. People say, well, this is appeasing Hamas. Hamas is by its definition committed to the destruction of the state of Israel. What they want by recognizing a Palestinian state that recognizes the state of Israel is exactly the opposite of Hamas. People say, well, if you recognize the Palestinian state, you're incentivizing Hamas not to negotiate. Hamas was rejecting those offers well before Macron recognized a Palestinian state. So the framework that I have offered is that the United States should recognize a Palestinian state. It should have no Hamas. It should be demilitarized. It should recognize Israel as a Jewish democratic homeland. It should be on 1967 borders, and the United States should actively engage with the 22 other Arab nations in working towards a Palestinian state that recognizes the state of Israel as a Jewish democratic homeland. This will offer people hope in the region. It will offer a concrete solution away from Hamas and a concrete solution forward. The last point I make, people far more talented than me have tried this in the past, a two-state solution. President Clinton spent years on it. President Obama tried. Why could it work now? Several differences. First, the Arab states are in a different place. 22 Arab states have now said that there needs to be a Palestinian state without Hamas and that recognize Israel as a Jewish democratic homeland. That was not the case when President Clinton was there and President Obama was there. Second, there is a change of public opinion in the United States that cares and prioritizes human rights and expects us to have a human rights resolution in that region, not just ignoring that region. And third, I believe a new generation can help look at this with fresh eyes and try to offer a way forward. With that, Felicia, I'm happy to engage in conversation.
Yeah, no? Well, thank you for sketching out your vision on this, but I think just as a start, can you bring us up to date? I know you've been leading an effort in the House to get some of your colleagues to sign on to a letter about this. How many signatures have you garnered at this point, and what is the plan? Will this be tied to what's happening at the UN in some sense?
It's going to be released around the UN General Assembly. I think we're at 26 signatures so far. My guess is we'll end up around 35 to 40, and we're talking to different members. And the letter outlines basically the points I outlined about a Palestinian state, demilitarized 1967 borders, no Hamas, fair and free elections, recognizing Israel as a Jewish democratic state.
And just to press you on the point, you said that you know that the criticism for recognizing a Palestinian state is, or I should say, starting the process is that it would appease Hamas. I think that Trump administration officials, a lot of Israeli officials, I think even some of your own Democratic colleagues say the same. How is it not if I guess their argument is that if Hamas's point in launching this attack on October 7th was to create a Palestinian state, then you're giving them what they want. Why do you think that is not the case?
I hear what they're saying, but that's not Hamas's point. Does anyone believe that Hamas is going to stop at a state that is Gaza and the West Bank that doesn't have Hamas and that recognizes the state of Israel as a Jewish democratic homeland? Hamas's purpose is to eliminate Israel. So you're basically, I'm offering a framework that one is saying no Hamas. So how is that appeasing Hamas when they can't even be in power? That two is saying that you have to have Israel's a fact. I mean, it's not that it needs to be recognized, but you have to have people in the region recognize that Israel exists as a Jewish democratic homeland. Hamas would never do that. And that we need free and fair elections in Palestine. So I agree that Hamas's goal is the destruction of Israel. But I'm offering something different. And the second point I would say is, how is the current thinking worked out? How is Israel standing in the world today? How is Israel support in the United States today? How is Israel support with the younger generation today? I said to Prime Minister Netanyahu, I said, Mr. Netanyahu, you may be thinking that you're achieving a secure Middle East by taking out Nasrallah and Sinwar, of course, were horrible actors, and taking this action against Iran. But you are making life far harder for the person who's going to sit in your seat 2 to 4 to 6 years from now. And so I would argue that the current approach has not served that region's interests or Israel's interests.
And when you talk about an alternative to Hamas, I think one of the big challenges for this day after planning is that I think much of the world would see the Palestinian Authority as the best body to kind of go into Gaza, but Israel repeatedly rejects the Palestinian Authority as a legitimate governing body, and Hamas or what could come in the day after. Do you think that there's anything other than the Palestinian Authority here when you talk about an alternative? Do you think that your effort can somehow pressure Israel to accept this?
Well, yes, there needs to be an alternative, and that should be free and fair elections in Palestine with the Palestinian voices. I mean, I don't think that there are many Palestinians who think the Palestinian Authority is the only representative of them, and they have concerns. And so there should be a way to allow for elections there. We should have the support of the allies, our Saudis, Jordan, Egypt, other allies, in looking at what a governance structure would be that does not threaten Israel, that has security, that isn't overtaken by Hamas, because how are you going to make sure that that structure actually can govern? But I think that has to be in consultation with the Palestinian people. And I don't think this is an American president politely picking up the phone and saying, okay, Israel, is this fine? This is what we're going to do. This is in the United States' interest to have two states, and everyone is going to come on board in trying to work towards this.
By leading this initiative, I think you're wading very head-on into what has become a very emotional debate in the Democratic Party. How would you kind of describe the polls of the debate right now? It's after the election. I think the dust is kind of settling. Where do you think we are?
We're at a place where America feels embarrassed about our place in the world and our place here. I mean, we're supposed to be the good guys. We're supposed to be the moral leaders of the world. We're supposed to be a nation that isn't transactional, that has a politics that isn't retribution-based, that articulates a moral vision for the world that the world looks up to. And I think that Gaza is just one important place where people feel, well, we're not the good guys here. And I'm not saying that the problem wasn't Hamas. Of course, Hamas did the terrorist attack. But 2 years of seeing killing in Gaza and the war not ending, people feel, well, this isn't the Israel of Rabin. This isn't the Israel of Shimon Peres. This is not the United States that's a moral leader for human rights and peace. And so the people who have been swept up, young people on the streets who are marching, yes, it's about Gaza and human rights, but it's about how does America exert moral leadership again in the world? How do we be a voice for human rights in the world? How do we capture what in modern times President Obama captured, a moral nation at home and around the world?
It seems to me that the politics in the Democratic Party have not really caught up to the sentiment on the ground. I mean, the vote on the resolution of disapproval, and Congress did get, I think, 25 senators, which is obviously a record high, but not
27. I think.
27.
Yeah.
Thank you for
I
correcting
think.
me.
Yeah.
A high number, but not anything that will really, or at least doesn't have the power in this current configuration to kind of really move the needle tangibly. So I just wonder, why have the politics not caught up? When do you think some of the kind of demonstrations we've seen on college campuses, just the general kind of discontent that's coming up in poll after poll? I think there's a recent Pew Research poll. When will that kind of translate in the Democratic Party, and how?
Well, politics have shifted, in my view, dramatically in the last 2 months. Prior to 2 months ago, I had colleagues who would argue with me because they knew I was critical of the way Netanyahu had conducted the war, and I voted against the $14 billion supplemental about a year ago. And they'd argue and they'd say, "Ro, but isn't the world safer? You don't have Sinwar, you don't have Nasrallah, you have a government in Syria that now is more willing to work with the West and recognize Israel. You were for the JCPOA, but whatever you say, Iran's capability has at least been diminished by a year. How are you not saying it's safer? This used to be the tenor of debate in the Congress. And I can go, I don't want to belabor with all my counterpoints, but that used to be the debate. The last 2 months, there were very few people, even people who have been staunch supporters of the U.S.-Israel relationship, who are speaking out because of the famine, because of the starvation. You have people like, who I respect deeply, but people like Senator Slotkin, Senator Shaheen, and others joining Bernie Sanders' resolution to say no more military weapons to Netanyahu that are being used to kill civilians. We can disagree on the policy, but anyone who does not think that the politics of this have shifted dramatically in 2 months, more than they've shifted in my 9 years in Congress, is just not looking at the data. And anyone who thinks that Mamdani's election in New York was just about affordability and had nothing to do about Gaza is deluding themselves. So this is an issue. By the way, I was up in New Hampshire with Senator Sanders to groups of older New Hampshire voters, no Arab Americans, no Muslim Americans, and all I wanted to talk about was the economy. So many questions came up about Gaza and human rights. So this is an issue at the core of our democratic base, and it goes to, what kind of nation are we going to be? What kind of a nation are we in terms of recognizing the human dignity of all?
I believe when the letter that you're spearheading first came out, I think I saw you gave some comments that the letter had leaked out.
Yeah, someone leaked it to try to...
What do you think is happening? What does that say about this kind of issue in the party right now?
Well, I don't know who leaked it,
Sure.
But someone was trying to leak it to either embarrass me or to try to get less people to sign the letter, and it ended up actually giving it more momentum. But, I've gotten criticized on the letter from some people on the left. If you look at the co-sponsors we don't have some of the people who are further to my left because they disagree on the 2 states. They believe there should be one state or a federation. They disagree on the 1967 borders. They disagree on the demilitarized aspect of a Palestinian state. So it's, my position is where I think we could go for peace, but there's not a consensus even among the progressive wing on my position.
Just taking a step back, Democrats are in the minority right now. I think Congress as a whole has struggled to kind of find its place in a very powerful Trump administration. What effect do you think, like a macro effect, will sending this? Does it bolster what Europe and other, what France and other countries are trying to do? Like, do Democrats have any real leverage here to influence things?
I hear what you're saying. First of all, the 1964 Civil Rights Act was first introduced in 1950. So a lot of times things in Congress are about building support for the place where we want to go and how we go forward. And the letter is an effort at articulating something constructive and forward-looking for after this horrific war ends. But in terms of the immediate, and I'm probably going to have disagreements with people in the room here, my view is that the United States has to say we're going to stop giving offensive military weapons to Netanyahu that are being used to kill civilians. And that leverage is the thing that will end the war. And then we demand, of course, unconditionally the release of the hostages. But I do not believe that you're going to have the release of the hostages before you have an end to the war. I mean, I think you have to do both simultaneously. The reality is Netanyahu's government says, okay, we want also Hamas to leave. Well, if you tie that to the release of the hostages, that's going to be very, very difficult. You're not going to get, first, let's just end the war, release the hostages. Then we can talk about a solution in Palestine that does not involve Hamas, but that's going to involve many other countries. So your point is, why does it matter? It matters that the more voices that are speaking up, the more it can influence the president, because these are not just voices on the left now. They're also, as you know, some of the voices on the right.
You said when you spoke to voters in New Hampshire, all they wanted to talk about is, all they want to talk about is some. And then you mentioned that you don't think the Mamdani election is only about, affordability. How much of an issue do you think this will be in the midterms?
It'll be an issue in Democratic primaries, in a number of Democratic primaries. I still think that the general election, it will be a significant issue is on the economy, on healthcare. But it'll be an issue in a number of primaries, and it's certainly going to be an issue in the future of Democratic leadership across different positions.
And you mentioned offensive or military assistance to Israel. This is a relationship governed by a memorandum of understanding that is renegotiated every 10 years. The next one is due to be enacted in 2028, which means as far as I know, the negotiations haven't started. That number is about $3.8 billion right now. Do you think that there's enough political sentiment in the U.S. that this number could go down, or do you think that we're not there yet?
Yes, I do, and I think it depends fully on Israel's future actions, and I think it'll, at the very least, be conditional, and it will be required with adherence to the Leahy laws and human rights. But I voted for the first one years ago in Congress, but that's not going to be the future. And I would say that regardless of whether the next administration is a Democrat or a Republican, remember, we have had for 12 years, 3 80-year-old presidents. That's not the future of this country. And I just think there's such a disconnect between what people are seeing today. This is what I respectfully tried to explain to Prime Minister Netanyahu, which was a wonderful conversation. At the end, I have his aide who comes up to me and says, "Can we get your number?" And I said, "Oh, did the Prime Minister agree with anything I said?" He said, "No, we think you have no idea what the hell you're talking about on the Middle East. But you do represent the most important district in the world with AI, so we have to take you seriously." But the point is that there's a new generation in this country on the right and the left, and it's going to be a totally new paradigm for how we're going to engage in this country and the world. And so I think anything where you're saying, "Oh, are we going to do the same thing as the past?" We're not, regardless of who's the president and who's the Secretary of State.
Speaking about this new paradigm, have you spoken to any of your Republican colleagues about your letter? And do you think that you could get any of them to sign on?
I have, but I've used so much political capital to get them on Epstein
Yes.
that I've gotten Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Nancy Mace. We'll see. I mean, I think that there are a number of them who are sympathetic to the approach, but whether they get on the letter or not, I don't know. So far, none of them have, and a lot of my conversations with them have been right now on the Epstein.
Of course, as a foreign policy nerd, I have to ask. But more broadly, I think the Democratic Party has struggled for a long time with this question of Israel, like what should the U.S. relationship be to Israel? It seems there's a new dynamic here, which is that Republicans, I think they're having a different debate, but there's also kind of a generational split, old and young. How do you kind of see this dynamic playing out? And do you see any opportunity for Democrats there?
I do. I think that should be a bipartisan consensus that we need to recognize the humanity of people in Gaza and the West Bank, that we need to have a secure Israel as a Jewish democratic state, but also have a Palestinian state, that the overextension of our military from the Iraq War to staying in Afghanistan 20 years to a Libya operation that didn't work out, to the extension and projection of militarism in the Middle East has prevented us from investing at home, has prevented us from building up our own economy, and that while we don't want an isolationism, we don't want a retraction from the world, we need a different vision for leading the world that isn't going to stem with a overconfidence in the extension of just militarism. There are people on the left and the right who agree with that basic framework, and I believe that will be a framework where, for a generation that has grown up weary of American adventurism overseas that they feel has not sufficiently addressed the loss of the American dream at home.
And if you could, what do you think is the appropriate kind of U.S.-Israel relationship at this stage?
It's a fair question, and it depends a lot on Israel. Anyone who has an iPhone that has parts in Israel that have been developed, and of course we have a economic, a cultural, technological partnership. But I think Israel has to, one, stop the war. They have to participate in a recognition constructively of a Palestinian state. They need to stop building settlements in the West Bank. And they need to understand that they're not going to have a blank check from a next American president, and that they will be part of the process of bringing peace, not out of a plea, but out of a demand that America will stand for actual two states, and we're going to work to make it happen. And they need to be part of that. And so I think a lot depends. If you have someone like Shimon Peres or someone like Ehud Barak or others come and they are partners in a vision of restoring a moral standing, then I think the relationship will be much better than where it is today. But right now, it's at a point of at the lowest that certainly in my lifetime.
Israelis have to go to elections by October of next year, so perhaps there might be some changes. But just looking backwards at what happened during the Biden administration, there have been a number of officials who have come out publicly and kind of either, in the case of the former State Department spokesman, Matt Miller, he said something like, well, I wasn't saying my own views. I think he said he believed that Israel was committing genocide, or I don't want to oversimplify his words, so please check them. I don't have them in front of me. Jake Sullivan has come out and said he supports an arms embargo. What do you make of all of this?
Has Jake said that? Yeah, wow.
He didn't say that? Okay, he said it a little more nuanced. He said a little more nuanced than me, the journalist looking for headlines, summed it up. But to take a 5,000-foot view step back, many of the top officials involved in the policy have come out since and have reflected a lot about how it went under the Biden administration.
I think that's wonderful. Look, I thought Tony Blinken's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal was a very thoughtful one. Now, I don't want to misrepresent him endorsing my approach, because he had the view that there should be the conditions before the official recognition. But mine is the recognition and many of the things he's articulated as the predicates of that Palestinian state. But that, to me, this is where I'm different from some in my party. I think we need to bring peace, everyone from Mamdani to Blinken in our party, to figure out how we bring peace. AIPAC doesn't like me. They attack me all the time. I still meet with people from AIPAC from my district. I believe we have to reach everyone. I'm getting attacked because I'm going to Dearborn, so some Arab conference, and they're looking at the statements of everyone who's spoken there. I mean, if we had everyone who's here and everything you've said, that can't be attributed to me. My view is that we have to. It's a very hard situation. I mean, the previous 50 years, 60 years, it hasn't been solved. So it's not an easy situation to be able to address. 26 signatures is a lot for this kind of a letter. I mean, I get that it's not a majority, but a lot of times these letters get 3-4 signatures. I mean, this is showing that there's a growing sense of where we need to go. And some of the things about not having military weapons that are being used to kill civilians have 50, 60 House sponsors. But I think what the Democrats need is a clear articulation of principles and a vision on this issue, and not wishing it away. And I think that there is I mean, you may not agree with what I'm trying to do or my positions, but what I'm trying to do is articulate a constructive way forward that can recognize Israel as a Jewish democratic homeland, but give a voice to the national aspirations of the Palestinian people, and that can be human rights focused and bring this party together, from Mamdani to Blinken or Sullivan or people even to their right. I mean, we've got to figure out how do we actually move forward to bring peace and to engage. One thing I do think, and I don't blame President Biden for this, but this view that we can just ignore the Palestinian issue, that we can work around it through the Abraham Accords, that we can pivot to Asia, that turned out to be wrong. And next time, any American president needs to do the painstaking work of early engagement in trying to solve this issue. I wish the president, Trump, would do it. It doesn't look like he has the appetite to do it, but because diplomacy is hard, statesmanship is hard. But my hope is that an expectation is that the next leader will do that.
And at this time, I'd like to invite CFR members to join our conversation with their questions. Okay, start with you.
Maybe just give me one sentence on your background or name, if you don't mind.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is James Siebens. I'm with the Stimson Center, where I'm a fellow. My question builds on your remarks about how the current approach is not necessarily in the best interest of the United States or of Israel. As you know, the previous administration concluded that it was reasonable to assess that Israel was, in some instances, violating international humanitarian law, and nonetheless, Antony Blinken's State Department decided to continue with arms transfers despite that conclusion. Do you feel, or do you believe that the State Department acted in good faith in that assessment, or that its decision to continue the policy was a sort of a political determination rather than one that conformed with the law?
The ultimate responsibility lies with the president. The president makes the decisions, and President Biden, from his own recollections and retellings since 1973, was a unabashed supporter of the state of Israel, and made it clear that he wanted to not have a conditionality with Israel. And so I think that was a mistake. I was critical of it at the time. I voted against the $14 billion. I voted against the unconditional military sales, including the 2,000 bombs. And my belief is that that's not going to be the policy of a future Democratic administration. So that, yeah, I mean, does that answer your question?
You believe they acted according to the law?
Well, I don't think it was in accordance with the Leahy law. I think the Leahy law needs to be enforced, and we need to do a better job of enforcing it.
I know I saw you back there.
Stephen Cook, Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks for coming to the Council. I appreciate your talk this morning, and I don't think anybody can argue with the moral case for a Palestinian state, but the way in which you framed your opening remarks and your answers to the questions is somehow striking out some bold new vision, and that fresh eyes are going to solve this terrible problem. But what you articulate sounds a lot like what President George W. Bush laid out in 2002, when he said that the end goal of American policy was a Palestinian state, two states sitting side by side, a demilitarized Palestinian state, new elections in Palestine, 67 borders, those kinds of things.
I should call him up to endorse my letter.
He may. But my question is, how is this different from what's been consistent in American foreign policy since at least 2002? And that was fairly consistent with the Oslo Accords, which go back to 1992. So what's new in what you're saying, other than the fact that there are 26 members of Congress who are willing to sign on to a letter saying it would be a good thing for the United States to recognize a Palestinian state?
Well, I agree with you. That I appreciate your making that point. I think it is actually very consistent with what Clinton's framework was Bush, what Obama's framework was. What is new is, one, that the United States should actually recognize it, because it's going to actually give more teeth to a rhetoric of two states. Right now, people don't actually believe it. It just seems like we say it, and we've never recognized it. That's what's fundamentally new about the letter. Secondly, you have now the Arab states that are in a very different place than they were back when President George Bush was there. There's a much more of a willingness to see a recognition of Israel as a democratic Jewish homeland, and that wasn't the case with a lot of the Arab countries. And third, you have where probably I agree more with President Bush's father, a willingness for the United States to say, if you don't do this, there are going to be consequences. Baker did that. Bush Sr. did that with some of the settlements. And there's going to be, in my view, a much bigger willingness to say, you can't just come and defy the American president, the American administration. You need to actually stop the settlements. You need to be part of recognizing a Palestinian state. And if not, you're not just going to get negative speeches. You're going to have the most powerful country in the world. By the way, the GDP, my district like dwarfs by orders of magnitudes the entire Israeli economy. You're going to suffer consequences if you're not working in the direction constructively. And I think that second statement is there on the left and the right. I mean, on the right, I don't disagree with it, but they call it America first. America calls the shots. On the left, America is going to stand firmly for actual two states. So that's what's different.
Okay, now we have a virtual question.
We'll take our next question from Mark Rosen.
Congressman Khanna, you've made a case for recognizing a Palestinian state, but do you not agree that every time Israel has given up land, it withdrew completely from Gaza in 2005? The result was Hamas took over. We got terrorism, rockets, tunnels, Iranian proxies, not peace. And surely you must agree the Palestinian Authority still refuses to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, barely condemned October the 7th, still funds and glorifies terrorists. Why should this time be any different? And if there are free and fair elections, as you suggested in the Palestinian areas, and Hamas or some other similar organization that wants the destruction of Israel gets elected, what happens then under your plan?
All fair questions. First of all, the withdrawal of Gaza still left a fair amount of embargo in place on Gaza. I mean, there was the restriction on people moving in Gaza. As you know, the unemployment rate in Gaza was almost 45%, and there was not a clear withdrawal of Gaza in a way that could have developed a Palestinian state. Second, there were moments, I forget the details, in 2006 where there was still a willingness to have a negotiation to work towards two states, and it broke down. And so we need to make sure that there is constant engagement in not just a withdrawal, but there has to be then the actual Palestinian state. Now, that state should and must recognize Israel as a Jewish democratic homeland. And if there is a Palestinian election where that's not the case, then the United States needs to make it clear that we're going to stand with Israel as a Jewish democratic homeland, and we're not going to allow for the attacks on Israel or aggression on Israel. I mean, if that's why I started by saying Hamas's terrorist attack was horrific. And if you look at the record for the first 3 months, I said Israel had the right to hunt down the people who committed those atrocious acts and so self-defense. So I'm not saying that if a Palestinian leadership, Palestinians elected a government that then threatens terrorism or attacks on Israel, that the United States is going to say, okay, of course we're not. And I think that the 22 Arab states can help with that. But we have to offer some framework of hope and a path forward, because the current way is not working. Is my outline with risk? Of course there's with risk. But it's the only path I see forward to be constructive.
Thank you. Viviana Mazza. I'm the U.S. correspondent for the largest Italian newspaper, Corriere della Sera. I have two questions. One is, what do you expect from the United Nations General Assembly, where, as we know, some countries are saying they will recognize Palestine, and Israel, as a result, could annex parts of the West Bank. Second thing, you mentioned earlier that there is a feeling of embarrassment for the role of the U.S. In the world, among some people at least. And my question is, this is not happening in a vacuum, of course, and so just yesterday there were the drones, the Russian drones downed, by Poland. What should the U.S. reaction be, in your opinion, to something like that? Thank you.
I think the country is hungry for moral leadership. Most Americans were hoping when President Trump was standing next to Vladimir Putin, he would have said, Mr. Putin, you were wrong to invade a sovereign country. That's what Ronald Reagan would have done. That's what Barack Obama would have done. That's what almost any Democratic president would have done. So there is a sense that everything in this country has become transactional. Everything in this country is about just this administration's personal relationships and power, and whether you were with them and flattered them. I don't remember any other president in my lifetime where I felt that way. Even with President George W. Bush, where I disagreed with the war in Iraq so deeply, I remember, like every American, cheering when he spoke a few days after 9/11, when today, of course, is the anniversary of that, when he was on the rubble of rocks, or when he spoke to Congress. There was always a sense in this country of being inspired to stand for moral principle, even when we disagreed. And there's a sense that we have lost that under this president, by many. I mean, obviously he was elected, but many feel that way. And Gaza is one place where we feel that way, where people every day are seeing the killing of children and women, and they are not seeing our government being able to stop it. If anything, they're seeing that we're continuing to do it. I mean, and then they wonder, how is it that the President of the United States is upset with Netanyahu, who has these strikes in Qatar, and it's just, well, I'm upset, I don't know. What do you mean you're upset? I mean, you're the leader of the free world, the most powerful country in the world. It's not enough to just say I was upset. You make it clear. Never are you going to do something like that without my permission, if you want the United States support.
Nope. Ambassador Froman.
Violations? Okay. I guess I should follow our own instructions here, huh? Thanks for being here, Congressman. And let me build on a couple of the previous questions and play devil's advocate a little bit here. You've focused on the changing politics here around the Middle East. There's another democracy where the politics of this issue have changed, and that's in Israel, where whatever support there was for a two-state solution seems to be dwindling. And in fact, the irony is, post-October 7th, the two-state solution is very, very popular around the world, except with two communities, Israelis and Palestinians, where the river to the sea is not a call for a two-state solution, and the politics in Israel are positively toxic towards this as well. So how do you overstate, or let me suggest, perhaps you overstate the significance of U.S. influence to dictate to other countries and other democracies what they should and shouldn't believe to be in their own interests, and two, to build on what Stephen said earlier, your proposed solution is very much what has been sort of the status quo since the 1990s. The situation in the Middle East, the security situation from Lebanon to Syria to Iran to the Gulf has fundamentally changed. Do we need to be putting thought into something that's out of the box as a solution here, not just going back to the Alone Plan or the 1967 borders as the framework?
Well, both very thoughtful questions. When I was in Israel in August of last year, and was also in Jordan and Saudi Arabia, there was someone who had voted labor, and he said his mother is the most left person and now does not believe in the two-state solution. So obviously there's deep fear, there's deep trauma, there is a sense that what happened was unconscionable, and that this is not the time. But I think that can change. Things can quickly change once the war ends and when people think about how do we rebuild in a sustainable way. And I don't say that we can dictate what is in Israel's interest. Obviously, Israel is a sovereign country, but we certainly can attach consequences to how that will impact their relationship with the United States. And so if they are going to choose a certain path, then they would have consequences in terms of the U.S.'s support. If they want to choose a different path that we believe is in the interests of human rights and in the world, that would be that would impact our relationship. So it's less to say that we're going to tell you what's in your interest, but we are going to define our relationship with a belief of a framework that is a secure Jewish democratic homeland of Israel and a secure a Palestinian state. Now, if there are alternative approaches, I'm open to them. I'm certainly not of the view that this is the only approach. And, you know, there are certainly alternatives to the quote unquote left. If there are other alternatives that would be possible, I'm open to that.
I know we have another virtual question.
We'll take our next question from Sarah Harrison.
Hi, Representative Khanna. Sorry for the pause there. It's just unmuting myself. Thank you for speaking today. My question is about the approach that you're taking here on focusing on statehood at a moment when it's not clear what is going to be left of Gaza or the West Bank, especially given the U.S.'s continued military support. And so I'm just wondering why the approach isn't to insist on and focus on stopping the support under U.S. law and as a matter of policy to Israel to stop the complete and total destruction of Gaza, because it's not clear there can even be a Palestinian state if Gaza is obliterated, which we are every day watching happen before our eyes. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the moral urgency with that, and I supported Senator Sanders' amendments. I mean, I couldn't vote for them. I'm not in the Senate, but I support that approach of not providing military sales to Netanyahu that's being used to kill civilians. But I think that this is simply recognizing the humanity of the Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza at a time that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu are trying to erase Palestinian identity by expanding settlers and bombing in Gaza. And for the United States to do it is going to have a huge major implication in the world, very different than just France and England and Canada doing it. I respect all those countries, but it'd be very different because the United States has actual consequence in terms of the military, economic support that we provide. And if it was enough consequence, I wouldn't be facing so much opposition, and you wouldn't have so much opposition from Israel on it. So obviously, there's something more than symbolic, but I agree with you on the urgency of what needs to be prioritized.
Dov Zakheim, nice to see you in a different context.
Good to see you. Great fellow commissioners on biosecurity.
Yeah, and you've done a great job on the commission, thanks. I agree with you most of the way. People who know me know that because I've written it often enough. My concern is, and I know Mr. Netanyahu just as you do, that he's not going to listen, that they're going to poke whatever hole they can poke, for instance, the 67 borders that Mike just mentioned. And I wonder whether it could be more effective, instead of essentially what Jerusalem will see as an all-or-nothing proposition, and they'll say nothing, to turn around, and maybe this is my background, because I used to run the budget of what used to be called the Department of Defense. By the way, I was an Undersecretary of Defense, and when you now become Undersecretary of War, USW could also stand for United Steelworkers. But to say we're going to cut off offensive weapons, the Israelis will turn around and say, well, that means we can't bomb Iran, for example. On the other hand, if you were to simply say, we're just going to cut back on the aid and force you people to choose, because money is fungible, between funding settlers, between bombing Gazans, between funding people who don't even want to serve in the military, and squeeze them that way, that might be more practical. What do you think?
You know, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think that the biggest shift in American foreign policy, in my view, for the next Democratic administration, whoever leads it, is going to be conditionality. That I maybe I'm wrong. I cannot foresee someone emerging out of a Democratic primary not being very clear that the days of blank checks and unconditionality are over. I think that will be the mainstream position that every mainstream candidate adopts. Now, the details of that, I think, are going to depend on the situation. Right now, there's such a horrific, every day we're seeing Gaza, and some people are saying stop the military sales till the war ends. After that, that maybe there's an approach that you're suggesting, that it is that there's a reduction of aid or there's a negotiation about what it is. I'm not prescribing one policy, certainly not prescribing one policy indefinitely. But what I do think is right now, let's do what we can to stop the war, and then let's think about what types of conditionalities move Israel to do the right thing. One place where maybe with Ambassador Froman's question, where I maybe just because I'm introspective and like to admit that I may not always be right and actually think. But, you know, I do think there's a fine line between what I'm emphasizing, that there's consequence and that there is that we're going to take tough measures, and the ability to inspire and the ability to have trust. And I think one thing Bill Clinton did in his successfully, even though he wasn't at the end, is he had a lot of trust from the Israeli people, in addition to from many in Palestine. I think Obama was off on that trajectory. I think he was mistreated by Netanyahu. But I'm thinking about the ambassador's question. I think it has to be tough, but without arrogance, and also winning over these folks. And probably my tone is it has to be calibrated to that, because it can't. While I think America needs to use its power, it also has to recognize the particularities and textures of these communities and say, look, here's why we think this is a good thing.
You've been very patient over there.
Thank you very much. I'm Joe Cirincione. I'm the former president of Plowshares Fund, among other jobs. And I first want to thank the council for having this session. With today's session and yesterday's session with Senator Shaheen, I think we're putting a lot of needed attention on this issue, and I hope we continue this pattern. And I want to thank you for your efforts. And I want to just build on the last couple of questions. Could you deepen your analysis of the hemorrhaging of support that Israel is now experiencing, not just in the Democratic Party, but its base and America as a whole, and what this could mean for the security of Israel? I care deeply about Israel. I have family in Israel, and I see the changes you're discussing more in the last 2 months than I've seen in my lifetime. And I worry that the Israelis don't understand what it means that they've crossed a line in Gaza by Israel treating Gaza like Rome treated Carthage. Just want to raze it to the ground. And then with the strike yesterday, striking a U.S. ally, where we have a major military base in the region, threatening instability in the region, that they've just gone too far, and what this could mean for the future of Israel going forward if they lose the kind of support that they've enjoyed for all these decades from America.
I agree with all that you've said. And, you know, people often are surprised when I say this. I'm more concerned about the positions I've staked out being criticized from the left than I am being criticized from the right. I mean, I think people are not fully appreciating how much this war psychologically has impacted any American under 45, and it's like we're in a time warp, which is just by sheer accident of history. We've had 80-year-olds respectfully govern this country for the last decade. That's not going to be the future of America. you're probably going to have a lot of people who are going to be leading this country in a totally different generation. And I think I understand that Israel feels under siege, but they are losing that. They're losing entirities of a generation. And one final point, people say, well, this happened in World War II, but this happened when we invaded Iraq. It's a different world. It's a different world with social media. It's a different world of norms. What you did in the past, which may not have been covered, doesn't have relevance to what you're doing today. And they're like, well, the only reason this is happening is because people are seeing babies blown up on social media. Fine, but they're seeing babies blown up in social media. Deal with it.
Well, on that hopeful note.
You want to get that, gentleman? One more?
One more? Okay, one more.
John Duke Anthony, founding president of the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations. Congressman, in terms of injecting more frames of reference to moral principles, legitimacy, and credibility in our discourse, so much rhetoric on upholding international law, the United Nations Charter, United Nations Security Council resolutions there, seems to be hollow when we ignore our own Constitution. Article 6 couldn't be clearer, black and white. All treaties, international agreements, and sanctions to which the United States is a sovereign signatory are the supreme law of the land. Article 6 gives you all the cover you need if you want to have a principled position as to why we're doing this in terms of pressure, in terms of influence. Would you comment?
Explain why Article 6 gives that in terms of what?
Yes, Fourth Geneva Convention of 1948-49 and the United Nations Charter about the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by force and the illegality of putting one's own people into the occupied territories, expelling the people in the occupied territories from their own lands and homes. It's pretty specific. And indeed, the Israelis were pressuring us to sign that because it was only a year or two after the Nuremberg trials there. So the atmosphere was receptive. The moment was politically propitious. What makes it less atmospherically receptive now or politically propitious? We don't have elections until next year. And if we're going to use the language of upholding international law, upholding the Constitution, defending the Constitution, there it is. We need only look in the mirror.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I do believe that the United States, as a signatory, as a part of treaties upholding human rights and upholding international law, should be offering that kind of framework. And that's why I tried to articulate a two-state framework, which is the recognition of Israel's self-determination as a Jewish democratic homeland and the recognition of Palestinian national aspirations. I guess I'll end with this point. I'm glad that people don't view this as that radical and that they view that this as a logical progression of American foreign policy. I don't think that that it should be viewed as radical, which is why I'm hopeful that we will get to the place of recognizing a Palestinian state. 147 other countries have. France is, Canada is, UK is, Australia is. Of course, it'll carry much greater weight if the US does it. But you know, it's very hard to have some radical, quick shift in American foreign policy. The fact that this builds on what we've done is hopeful. The final point I'll say is I certainly have a humility. I think we need to understand very few of us are going to have all of the answers. I do think we need a fresh pair of eyes and a new generation, but that new generation needs to draw on expertise. And on this issue, I really appreciate President Froman and this conversation to hopefully reach out to me if there are ideas you have, new ideas you have, critiques you have. The only way that America is going to get this right is to draw on all of the expertise and certainly people here at the Council of Foreign Relations. So thank you for allowing me to have this conversation.
I want to thank everyone for joining today's meeting and especially to Representative Khanna for such a thoughtful discussion. And please note the video and the transcript of today's meeting will be on CFR's website. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.